What's up, party people? We are in Nahum chapter 2, and this is a pretty interesting chapter as far as prophets go. It seems kind of par for the course, but as I was reading it, I had this realization that there's a way to think about this that I hadn't thought about before. So I'll share that with you in a little bit, but first we're going to jump in. So chapter 2, first off, apologies. I do have a cough. I have a cough drop in. I know that might be really annoying. If it's really bad, I'm actually going to delete this video, but if I don't think it's too bad, I'm going to stick with it. Sorry. The destruction of Nineveh. The scatterer has come up against you. Man the ramparts, watch the road, dress for battle, collect all your strength. For the Lord is restoring the majesty of Jacob as the majesty of Israel. For plunderers have plundered him and ruined their branches. So he's attributing this setup. He's saying, hey, get ready. But even if you get ready, it's not going to do any good because God's coming. The shield of his mighty men is red. His soldiers are clothed in scarlet. The chariots come with flashing metal on the day he musters them. The cypress spears are brandished. The chariots race madly through the streets. They rush to and fro through the squares. They gleam like torches. They dart like lightning. He remembers his officers. They stumble as they go. They hasten to the wall. The siege tower is set up. The river gates are open. The palace melts away. Its mistress is stripped. She is carried off. Her slave girls lamenting, moaning like doves and beating their breasts. Nineveh is like a pool whose waters run away. Halt, halt, they cry, but none turns back. Plunder the silver, plunder the gold. There's no end of the treasure or of the wealth of all the precious things. So Assyria was a plundering nation. They went out and they were very brutal. The Assyrian text, the Babylonian library backs this up. The Babylonian library has these walls where Assyrians were shown like cutting off people's thumbs or ears or all kinds of things just to assert their war violent dominance of their culture. There were pictures of them putting hooks in people's lips and dragging them around. Very brutal. They would flay their prisoners alive. Very brutal things that they had done. And they did all that for wealth. Like they built quite a wealthy existence for themselves by plundering the people around them. They did it through violence. They took things by force. So there's plunder the silver, plunder the gold. And I think there was Nineveh had taken great wealth during Assyria's military victories. Nineveh is the capital of Assyria, and Assyria is the place that took over Israel. So Israel was conquered by Assyria, and Nineveh was the prime culprit. Jonah, again, Nahum is speaking after Jonah. Jonah went to say that Nineveh was going to be destroyed. They were horrible warriors. They were horrible enemies of Israel. So, of course, Jonah wants them destroyed. That's a very human response. But the lack of compassion on Jonah's part was not great. God actually calls it out. It doesn't matter how terrible your enemy is. You're called to love your enemies and have compassion for people. To trust in the judgment of the Lord, not your own judgment. Which is interesting. It's just hard to wrap your head around that sometimes. So as horrible as Assyria was, Jonah called out for their destruction. They repented, but not forever. They ended up going after Israel, defeating the northern kingdom. Israel and Judah is watching this happen. And then eventually, Judah is taken over by Babylon. Desolation and ruin. Hearts melt and knees tremble. Anguish is in all loins. All faces grow pale. Where is the lion's den? The feeding place of the young lions, where the lion and lioness went, where his cubs were, with none to disturb. The lion tore enough for his cubs and strangled prey for his lionesses. He filled his caves with prey and his dens with torn flesh. Behold, I am against you, declares the Lord of hosts, and I will burn your chariots in smoke, and the sword shall devour your young lions. I will cut off your prey from the earth, and the voice of your messengers will no longer be heard. So again, nobody's getting out of this. Like it's coming for Nineveh. God is coming for Nineveh. There are very detailed images here. And where's the lion's den, the feeding place of the young lions? The lion tore enough for his cubs and strangled prey for his lionesses. So it says that through this destruction, God's going to provide for, his people. There's going to be a lot of treasure, a lot of spoils from attacking Nineveh. So this is really a very terrifying picture of judgment here. Again, Nahum is not taking it easy on Nineveh. And often, and I'll have to check in chapter 3 real quick, because I think it's just all about Nineveh, where a lot of the prophets are about the external, but then they go internal and they say, Israel and Judah, here's the message to you. This is a very terrifying picture of judgment for God's enemies. God's declaring through Nahum the destruction that he has set for Nineveh. And again, this is like a play-by-play. Even some of the things about fire and Nineveh being burned up. And is that in here? They're flashing metal. They gleam like torches. They dart like lightning. The palace melts away. There's evidence of tremendous fire damage, actually, in Nineveh. There was a siege. So I might be getting ahead of myself. In 612 BC, there was a 3-month-long siege of Nineveh by Babylon. And Judah did not learn from Israel's mistakes. They watched Babylon come in and tear Assyria apart. They tore down Nineveh, just as Nahum is saying here. So there's a lot of archaeological evidence in the Babylonian texts and Assyrian, all these, the Babylonian texts in this instance, but the archaeological evidence from Nineveh shows this tremendous siege, as well as historical evidence. So this event, it's always interesting to go back and see which events other historical texts or studies support. And this is actually a very well documented one, which is kind of cool if you wanted to check that out. As a bonus, as I was going through this, I thought, behold, I am against you, declares the Lord of hosts, and I will burn your chariots, and the sword shall devour your young lions. This is interesting because there are woe statements here about Nineveh, about what's going to happen. And there's also this, the Lord is restoring the majesty of Jacob. There's an actual cause. And a lot of the prophets attribute the causes of God to disciplining of his people or disciplining of the nations to try to get them to turn to him, or to, when I thought about that, it actually reminded me a lot of jujitsu. One compassionate thing that God does through the prophets is tell people why things are happening. I've done jujitsu. I haven't done it for a few months, so that's on me. But when I was getting better at jiu-jitsu, one of the things that I learned is it really sucks to lose at a combat sport. It really sucks. You're getting choked, or your arm is feels like it's going to be broken off, or your shoulder. And when you get into these sketch situations as a beginner, you have no idea why you're losing. So you get super frustrated because you're doing okay 1 minute, and then the next somebody's got their arm around your neck and they're choking you out. And you're like, well, how did this happen? It's very frustrating, frustrating feeling, helpless, frustrating feeling. And so you have to learn, why am I losing? And the same thing in jiu-jitsu. I started finding out that you can figure out how you're losing, and then I started getting a lot better, and things started to make more sense. And I lost and it sucked, but I wasn't as frustrated, and there was a comfort in it. Nahum means comfort. I thought that was a very interesting takeaway, because the thing that God does that's compassionate here is he's actually telling people the standard. He's telling people, this is how you failed to live up to things, and if you repent, there is hope for you. There's mercy and grace and hope, and salvation is the Lord's. You put your faith in him. On the flip side of that, Satan is a deceiver. He doesn't want you to know why you're failing, and if he can help it, he'll try to convince you to blame God for all your suffering and all your problems, and all to blame God, not to attribute to God's sovereign plan, right? This is where it gets a little nuanced. So on one hand, we have God who's straightforward about his standard and what that measurement looks like. And on the other, you have Satan, who's trying to deceive you about what the standard is, or to attribute your suffering to something outside your control. outside of your sphere of acceptance or outside your comfort zone or whatever it is. So it really struck me that it's actually a compassionate thing that God does in the prophets. And one of the things that we look at God's judgment, we don't see it as compassionate, but the idea that he would give a standard that is clear and a solution for us to bridge the unbridgeable gap, because we can't do that on our side. God has to do that. And he does it through Jesus Christ. So this idea that God would be compassionate in this way of not only showing us that the standard is there to point us to actual salvation, but then he provides the sacrifice that bridges the gap and then provides the salvation. And that's just all glorifying him. We can't take any credit for it. So I thought about that because oftentimes the most hurtful thing in a relationship is just there's some kind of tension or something going on. And like the worst place to be in a relationship is just this feeling of unknowing. Like, where am I at with this other person? And not have any idea why or how it is that way. But God doesn't leave us in that place. He lets us know the standard, and he encourages us and gives us the strength to do our best. But ultimately, he knows we're not going to be holy enough. And so he provides a sacrifice to allow us into his presence. It's just an amazingly beautiful thing that kind of struck me and stood out. So I hope that was cool. I hope that was a good tour of Nahum 2. I thought that was kind of an interesting takeaway as I read through this. But with that, we're going to jump into chapter 3. I think there's one or two sections in chapter 3. I think just maybe one. And so we'll jump into that next. But that's all I've got. Like and subscribe to catch all these videos as they come out. I really love doing this. I'll be praying for you. And I'll catch you soon. All right. Peace.